This is slide 2 of our first unit on Reconstruction. And now that we know Reconstruction is going to have to take place, we have to reconstruct the South. The big question is, how is it going to get done? So let's look today here at this slide at presidential reconstruction. Okay? And we got a couple different plans here, not just president, but Congresses as well. Let's start with our first president during Reconstruction, Abraham Lincoln. Okay? Lincoln's plan here will come to be known as, it gets the nickname, the 10% plan. 10%. And we'll talk about why here in just a moment. But first of all, the goal of Lincoln's plan was to put the country back together as quickly as possible. Lincoln believed that the southern states had never officially left the Union, so restoring them would be simple. Right? So he wants to put the country back together as quickly as possible. Lincoln's plan, he envisions it as being fair, but very simple, very easy, because Lincoln is only going to have 3 requirements to his plan. Okay? First of all, Lincoln says he wants 10% of a state's voters, meaning white men at this time. Okay? Lincoln wants 10% of a state's voters to swear an oath of allegiance, a promise of allegiance, that they're going to be good, loyal Americans. You know, I pledge allegiance and all that, right? 10% of the state's voters have to swear an oath of allegiance. Yes, I will be an American. I will not declare war on America. I will not fight against America and all of that. Right? So that's number 1. Number 2, his second requirement. The state needs 10% of its voters. Okay? This is why it's called the 10% plan. 10% of the voters have to agree to end slavery. They're going to uphold emancipation, right? Which at that point meant they have to ratify or agree to the 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment to the Constitution ends slavery. Right? So 10% of the voters have to agree, fine, no more slavery. We'll get rid of slavery. Done. Right? And third, they have to elect a new state government. If you had served in the state government before, or if you had been an officer in the military during the war in the South, you could not hold state government again because you were part of the old state government that declared war on the United States. So we can't have you back, right? So you have to elect a new state government. Old former state office holders are not eligible to serve again. Confederate generals cannot serve in state government. Okay? Everybody else is fine. So anyway, there's Lincoln's goal and his 3 requirements. Okay? Now, Congress is going to have a problem with President Lincoln's plan. So let's talk about Congress's response. Congress feared that we were just going to get right back to where we were with the rise of a planter aristocracy. The old white pro-slavery plantation owners are just going to get elected to office and we're right back where we started. Their argument is that 10% is way too low. That's only 1 out of 10. You can get 1 out of 10 people to agree to most anything. Their argument is we need more than that. We need more people in the state to agree to play by our rules. Okay? So they will pass what's called the Wade-Davis bill. Okay? Wade-Davis. Anytime you see a bill or an act or a law or whatever with a hyphenated name, that's usually the names of the congressmen that introduced the bill, that wrote it, supported it, introduced it, and all that. Here you see a picture of Benjamin Wade, congressman from Ohio. But anyway, the Wade-Davis bill is going to say, okay, Mr. Lincoln, fine. Your requirements are good. It's just way too easy. So We can get behind your three requirements, that's fine. Oath of allegiance, end slavery, new state government, great. But we want 50% of the country to agree to it. Okay? 50%, not 10. Right? So Congress and Lincoln are going to have a little fight here. Okay? Congress probably could have won this very easily, except for the fact that the Republicans, who are in the majority, most of the northern government was Republican, so the government in Washington, D.C. is primarily Republican. The Republicans couldn't even agree among themselves, and the Republican Party is going to split over this. The majority of Republicans were moderates, meaning kind of middle of the road. Okay? So you have the moderates here. The majority of Republicans were moderates. They sided with Lincoln for the most part. Okay? But couldn't get behind his 10% number. Right? The smaller group of Republicans, the minority, are the loud ones. They are known as the radical Republicans. Right? And these are Republican congressmen who want to see radical change or drastic change. Okay? Their goal is not to put the country back as quickly and easily as possible. The radical Republicans' goal, okay, is to punish the South. Okay? The radical Republicans want to punish the South. And indeed, most of the Republicans do. They just can't agree on how to go about doing it. Right? So kind of the goal of Congress here, and specifically the radical Republicans, is to punish the South. Lincoln wants to bring them back in, hold them accountable, but make it fair. Okay? Congress wants to punish the South. They want to see the South's social structure kind of turn upside down. They want to see the rich, wealthy plantation owners, the planters, punished, and they want to see these newly freed blacks in the South protected by the federal government. Okay? Now, I'll ask you a question here. Who do you think wins the fight? Is it Lincoln or is it Congress? Think about it. Okay. We don't know who won. Why? Because Lincoln was assassinated. We don't know if Lincoln's plan would have worked or not. What we do know is Lincoln's a very good politician. He probably would have been able to work with Congress to get a fair Reconstruction plan in place. But we don't know how it all plans out because he is shot and killed. Okay? Which brings in our third plan here, and our third character in our story, and that is Lincoln's vice president, Andrew Johnson. Here's the picture of Johnson right there under Lincoln. Here's Andrew Johnson. Now, to understand Johnson's plan and why Reconstruction ends up being such a fight, you got to understand something about Johnson and his background. Okay? First of all, Johnson was a Democrat. Lincoln was a Republican, and Congress was controlled by Republicans. So you might be thinking, how in the world does a Democrat from the South, he's from Tennessee, right? A Southern Democrat, end up Lincoln's vice president? Well, when Lincoln was running, they needed the support of war Democrats, Democrats that supported going to war. They needed the support of the South. So they choose a Southerner, a Democratic Southerner, Andrew Johnson from Tennessee. Lincoln wins, Lincoln and Johnson win. Johnson becomes the vice president. Now, Johnson was a Tennessean, right? Comes from a very humble childhood. He never had any formal schooling. He was apprenticed at, I think it was 10 years old, to a tailor. He taught himself to read growing up. It's not until he's married that he learns to write. His wife teaches him how to write. So he's a very poor white Southerner. Okay? He doesn't come from money. He's not from a rich plantation-owning family in the South, nothing like that. But he had managed to sort of get himself an education. He teaches himself to read. His wife teaches him to write. And he gets himself elected to Congress from Tennessee, okay? Because he stands up for the poor white Southerners. And there are a lot of poor white Southerners. And white men can vote. So he gets himself elected. Serves in Congress. He's a pretty good congressman. He's not great. But good enough to get himself elected. Okay? He'd stayed in the Senate when Tennessee voted to secede from the Union, to leave and join the South. Johnson stayed in the federal government, in the Senate from Tennessee. He was one of the few that did. So he becomes this hero to the North and a traitor to the South. Okay? So the South no longer likes Johnson. The North loved him because he was, he had betrayed the South and he had stayed with the Union and all of that. So Lincoln names him on the ticket, he gets elected, and suddenly he's vice president. The problem with Johnson is he doesn't fit in anywhere. He doesn't fit in with anyone. Okay? He's a Southerner who doesn't really understand the North. But he's a Southerner that the South didn't trust because he stuck with the North when war broke out. He's a Democrat who'd never really fully been accepted by the Republicans, and now, because he's joined Lincoln's ticket, he's a Democrat who's not accepted by the Democrats. So Johnson, by the time he becomes president, feels like an outsider, that nobody wants him. Okay? Some Republicans, a lot of the radical Republicans, were sort of pleased when Lincoln is killed because they believed that Johnson's hatred for the wealthy white Southerners, those plantation owners, would lead him to their side. Let's punish the South, punish the plantation owners, and all of that. They believed Johnson was going to be more sympathetic to their cause. So the radical Republicans were looking forward to Johnson becoming president. Oops, it doesn't work out that way. When Johnson becomes president, he returns to his Southern roots. So let's look at Johnson's plan now for Reconstruction, how he's going to get the country put back together. Okay? Johnson quickly moved to go back to Lincoln's 10% plan. He wanted to enact Lincoln's 10% plan, okay? With some changes. Okay? First of all, he says, okay, you got to agree to 10% of your voters have to agree to end slavery. That's the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. He can't do anything about an amendment to the Constitution. Right? He says, so you got to agree to end slavery. And you're going to have to elect a new state government again, but there's a catch. Okay? Johnson was going to allow wealthy, white, old pro-slavery plantation owners to come back and serve in office again. Just the thing Lincoln said they could not do, and certainly the thing Congress does not want them to do. Johnson's going to allow that. Now you might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, Johnson's a poor white Southerner. Why would he want to help the rich? Well, Johnson sees this as an opportunity to get even with the rich and put himself on their level. If wealthy white Southerners, and he defined that as any Southerner having property worth more than $20,000. Now, back then, that's a whole lot of money. Okay? Johnson says, if you are a wealthy white Southerner and you would like to put your name on a ballot to be elected to state office, they had to personally come to the president, get on their knees, and beg for Johnson's forgiveness. This is Johnson's chance to have the rich white Southerner, the people that always looked down on him because he was poor. This is his chance to get even with him. They have to come to him, make an appointment to meet with the president, and say, Dear Mr. President, I beg your forgiveness. get down on a knee and beg the president to forgive them. This, Johnson thinks, puts him on their level. It elevates him to the status of rich white Southerner. Now, if you're a rich white Southerner, are you going to be willing to do this? Sure you are. You're telling me all I have to do is go say, Mr. President, I'm sorry, I beg your forgiveness, and suddenly I get to hold office again? I get my money back? I get my state back? I get to run things the way I want to? Sure. What time's my appointment? I'll go do that today. Yes. So Johnson's happy. The rich white Southerners are happy. Everybody's happy except Congress, who hates this plan. If they hated Lincoln, they're really going to hate Johnson's plan. Okay? Once Johnson gets into office and old pro-slavery white Southern governments come back into power, the first thing they do is pass a series of laws in their state called the Black Codes. The Black Codes become the first segregation laws in our country. These are state laws meant to prevent any of the freedmen, the ex-slaves, from gaining any sort of power, any sort of equality. Let me give you an example to come up, some of them here. Labor contracts. Blacks who didn't have a job were forced to sign a labor contract. Okay, fine, we'll give you a job. You sign this contract. You're going to work on this. You're going to work on this farm, and we're going to pay you some money, the bare minimum. But if you didn't have a job, thanks to the Black Codes, you were a black man without a job, you could be put into prison for not having a job. And then they hired you out. So you were forced to sign labor contracts. And if you gave up, you jumped your contract, you left. If you were caught, you were fined and hired out to pay your fine. Other examples here of the Black Codes. Blacks were not allowed to serve on juries. So if you were a black man accused of a crime in the South and you were sent to a jury trial, you were going to have a jury of white men judging you. And you were always going to be found guilty. Whether you were or not didn't matter. So you couldn't serve on a jury as a black man. Blacks were prevented from owning land. You always had to rent land, pay the white man to live on his land. Blacks were not allowed to vote in the South, thanks to Black Codes. Blacks were not allowed to own a firearm, which in the South was a way of life. Okay? So you couldn't own guns. You had to have a travel permit to travel out of the county. And the only people issuing travel permits are the white government, and they're not giving you one. So the Black Codes are meant to keep blacks subservient, keep them under whites, and keep them from causing problems. So this sets up a long fight here between Johnson, who seems to want to almost reward the South for the Civil War, a fight between Johnson and Congress, who wants to punish the South. Two very different views of Reconstruction. And we'll see who's going to win the fight.